The dark librarian once again to tell tales of terror. Hello, Mr. Bones. You're sitting in my chair. Tonight, we're going to talk about this. Chamber of Chills #2. And you say, but, librarian, is that not the same issue we spoke of last time? Yes, of course it is. But that was a tale of sword and sorcery. This time, we will talk about the story, The Monster from the Mound, adapted from the story by Robert E. Howard. Yes. Yes. Chamber of Chills. This is #2. Published by Marvel Comics, 1972. It is a horror anthology from the early 70s, which ran a total of about 25 issues. The previous horror titles from Marvel, such as Chamber of Darkness and Tower of Shadows, presented primarily original stories, but Chamber of Chills adapted works from other media. In this case, we have a horror story from the pulps by Robert E. Howard. In the previous episode, we talked about a story of sword and sorcery by the author John Jakes of Bran the Barbarian. Now this story by Robert E. Howard. He was an American writer from Cross Plains, Texas, born in 1906, and he died by suicide in 1936. He started writing early for the pulps, primarily for weird tales. There are various other titles as well, but for the horror and fantasy stuff was primarily weird tales. And he wrote adventure, historical adventure, westerns, horror, and fantasy. And he was a friend of the horror writer H.P. Lovecraft. And he even wrote some stories which fit into Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. When he combined the horror with historical adventure, he had created the fantasy genre known as sword and sorcery, with such characters as Conan the Cimmerian, Bran MacMorn, Solomon Kane, and King Kull. Now, the artist for this story is Frank Brunner. And Frank Brunner entered comics as a horror writer and artist for the Warren magazines in the late 60s and early 70s. And titles such as Creepy, Eerie, and Vampirella. Then worked primarily in the 70s doing horror, etc. For Marvel. He moved over to Marvel. And he became best known for doing Doctor Strange comics. And later, Howard the Duck. Howard the Duck? Didn't that other guy? Yes. Val Mayerick, the artist for the Brack the Barbarian story we talked about last time, was the co-creator of Howard the Duck. But Frank Brunner didn't create. He simply drew the stories, as if that's a simple thing. Now let's get down to it. Let's check out this story. Chamber of Chills. Bizarre Brain Comics. Chamber of Chills. Okay. Nice cover illustration. This illustration goes to the story we're going to speak about. So this is issue 2, 1972. Now the story, although is based on a Robert E. Howard story, but is adapted by Gardner Fox. Now, that name should sound familiar to you also, because when I did the episode about Funda by Frank Frazetta, Gardner Fox had scripted that. Now, in this, The Monster of the Mound. Now we can see here, it looms in the West Texas moonlight. This takes place in Western times. In the West Texas moonlight, eerie and menacing. For many centuries, the mound has stood here, since long before the coming of the white man. No one knows just why it is so feared by Mexicans and Indians alike. Yet there is a sense of brooding mystery about it, a sense of evil lurking, as if waiting to be freed. The Monster from the Mound. Because the original title, which I actually like better from the original story, was The Horror from the Mound. But I guess Marvel has a long history with monsters. Okay, here we see it's nighttime in the desert somewhere. At a man's ranch, or just outside of man's ranch. We can see here the ranch house. Here's the mound, it's obviously in the desert. And here we see the fellow. Hey, Juan Lopez, you never not walk near that old Indian burial mound. You always go out of your way to avoid it. And here we see the Mexican fellow's Juan Lopez. Look of fear in his face. It's a good expression of fear on it. Even the way he's kind of walking past it, kind of creeping past it. And here's the mound he's talking about. Best not disturb what is hidden in the earth. Says it's haunted. So then the rancher asks him about it. There's Steve Brill, that's his name. It's a local rancher. Says, haunted? Haunted by what, Juan? He says, there have been more than Indians in this country, senor. I have heard tales. And he talks about when the conquistadors came through here. And he tells a little bit. He said, but there's no gold, which is probably a bad thing to say. So Brill gets to thinking, there might be gold there. There's nice. So you don't have like an overshoulder or just talking heads back and forth. You can see both the faces of both men in that one shot. And another good night. You can see the snake crawling by there. Now Brill gets to thinking, suppose there really is gold in that mound. I'd get rich by digging it up. Maybe Juan wants to keep that gold for himself. So he gets greedy and he thinks Juan's just as greedy as him. So he goes back into his house, gets out a pick and starts pick and shovel and starts digging. And he digs, and shortly he finds an old old Spanish spur. You can see it, old silver spur. Good view of it. But there's bits of charcoal too. This means this is an Indian burial mound. Indians kept charcoal fires burning for days. Blah blah blah. And then he keeps digging, and he strikes something, and it's a large, huge stone. It might be too big for him to move by hand. Now he's sure that the burial chamber hopes that there's gold in there. He's got, what's inside that tomb? And he hears something faintly as from far away. Brill hears a leathery rustling as of some long dead thing stirring, about to rise from its century-old crypt. Centuries-old crypt. Yeah, it's creepy. So he's a little less sure of himself. Decides to go back, get a crowbar, and he gets his guns. A few minutes later, he comes back. The stone's been moved away. And he goes, I'll bet Juan Lopez has been here. He let me do all the digging, and he came back for the gold. So now he's angry, and he gives some nice figure work here. That figure there looks almost like a Gil Kane figure from who did the. Gil Kane, you might remember, he's the one who drew the cover. But you can see the stone, give you the impression of the hole, and here he is with this shocked look on his face, with both his gun and his crowbar. One narrow panel tells you a whole lot. And here he is. He got his gun in his hand and a lantern, and he starts heading over to Juan Lopez's place. Here's his place now, and that shadow, and then there's this. You can see that it is night. And here's this odd-looking shadow in the window. What is it then? I've never seen anything like that before. It can't be Juan, and then a scream. Ah! And it's Lopez. He's scared out of his wits. He crashes in through the door, comes busting in, and here we see. He's busted the door off its hinges. Things are overturned. You can see the candle burning there, so that's why there was a source of light. And here you see the figure of Juan Lopez on the floor. Here you can see real good shot right there. You can see puncture marks in his throat as he holds the candle close. Marks on his throat like the fangs of an animal. But no wildcat could get in here at him, and besides, his body doesn't seem to be harmed except for those 2 punctures. And then he finds some paper. Juan had been doing some writing, so he takes it home. Here's this sound outside. My riding mount's whinnying in fear, let loose, so I can't ride to Coyote Wells. Whatever got Juan is coming for me, too. Well, let it come. I got my gun, and I'll be ready. Self-confidence, probably more to bolster himself up. And gets back to his ranch house and locks himself in. And then he starts reading what Juan had written. And it's briefly telling the story of one of the conquistadors and how they had come up this far north into Texas. And De Estrada and his men marched overland through Texas, over deserts and mountains, and his men began to die of strange marks upon their necks. It was Valdez. He is a vampire. Madre de Dios. That is why he was the only one alive on that cursed death ship. He killed them all. Yeah, because they had described how they had found this fellow. And so they took him during the day when he was lethargic, dug a hole, buried him in, and covered it up with boulders. So that was why I found a Spanish spur in the mound. One of those caballeros lost it. Okay, and here we see. Here's his gun. It's not in his hand, not on his hip. Here's his gun sitting on the table. You can see the light from the candle. See, he's reading, and here and behind, you see something looking at him. Someone looking at him through the window, and then it crashes through the window. But there's no such thing as vampires in. It's Valdez! He grabs the gun and shoots him. But I must feed. But the gun does no good. So Brill has to fight him off, using just as his own main strength, old-fashioned. I mean, vampire's been in the buried underground for centuries, so he's probably not as strong as he would be, even though he had recently fed. And he's fighting. He manages to get away just a moment. Get away here. That's nice. Nice fist right there. Some good storytelling right there. And then he manages to get a hold of the vampire. He doesn't. I've got one last chance. I don't have any stake to run into his heart, but that table edge sound should serve. He's able to pick him up and throw him. Breaks his spine on the table. So he's just laying there, can't get up, can't move, he's thrashing around. He grabs the lantern and smashes it. And here's the vampire burns down his whole house. Is it? The house burns quickly until the very bones of Don Santiago de Velasquez are utterly consumed and destroyed from the knowledge of men forever. One could only hope that this was the end. Wow! There. Yeah, these books didn't have horror hosts. Now, there hasn't been a whole lot to point out too much on it. Now, Frank Brunner was very good at the horror genre. Lots of darks, lots of shadows. You can see something here, some really nice feathering in the line work. Good texturing in the wooden interior. And he's very good at figures. Very good. That's one of the reasons why he became so popular doing Doctor Strange. Was his good figures and conveyed the creepy very well. Here's good, nice. Must have done some historical research. Good job on the Spanish conquistadors, the costumes. They look authentic, whether they are or not, who can say. But they look relatively authentic. Again, for the most part, standard 3-tiered storytelling. Basic 6-panel. But here, both here, one extra. Here's one extra. Make it basically 4-tiered. Had the onomatopoeia, the sound effects. Some stories don't do that. I believe Joe Kubert when he did Tarzan, even though he did in the comics, in the Western in his war comics he did, but I don't think he did in the Tarzan. I'd have to relook. And when they do Conan and Cull comics, they don't do the sound effects. They don't even do the thought balloons. Like here, he's talking to himself instead of thought balloons. But here, no, he's still talking to himself. But I think here, yeah, here he has the thought balloons. But like when they do other Robert E. Howard stories, they don't use thought balloons. They usually use caption boxes to describe the what he's thinking, what the character is thinking, and to describe what's needed to be described going on. And I think that's an enjoyable. I love Robert E. Howard. He's one of my favorite authors. That's one of the reasons why I did this. I love his fantasy. I love his horror and Western stuff. I really like his Western stuff. He was at the time of his death, he was starting to do more of the Western and getting away from the horror and fantasy. But no telling how long he could have done